everybody. Thank you for coming here. So I'm Rob Plunkett. I'm one of the duos of state senators. The other is Seth Bongartz. He was in Royalton today, chairing a meeting about a little issue called education reform. Otherwise, he would have been up here as well. So my job is just to welcome you all. So welcome. And also, you probably noticed that I'm the only Benningtonian up here in Bennington, so I get to welcome our representatives from elsewhere. So there's Kathleen James, representative from Bennington. I think it's 5.
4.
Oh, I got the number wrong.
Can you rattle off the towns, though?
Yes, Arlington, Sandgate, Manchester, and Sunderland.
Thank you. That's good. That was really impressive.
I don't know the number, but I know the towns. And Representative Durfee is on my left. He is from Bennington 3. All right, got 3. Shaftesbury, Sunderland. But mostly I'm here to welcome the Vermont Secretary of State, Sarah Hanses, who's obviously to my right. And thank you. Thank you for coming to Bennington.
Absolutely.
For being what I see kind of a hero for Vermont. And I don't say that lightly, just because we're going to be talking about election integrity. And Secretary Hanses does the heavy lifting for that. I think the town clerks do the even heavier lifting. But we'll hear more about that tonight. And now I'm just going to hand it off to Representative Durfee, who will introduce Secretary Hanses.
Thank you, Senator Plunkett. Before the introduction, a couple of housekeeping things. And I begin by saying thank you to our hosts from the UU for allowing us to use this space. It was, I will say, without going into any detail, it's a bit of a challenge to find a space that would be available to us tonight, so thank you. There are restrooms down through that doorway, and there is an emergency exit even further down the hall there. So in the event of an emergency, you can go that way or the door we came in. This event is being recorded. Cat TV is here, and we want to thank them as well. It's not being broadcast live. Confirming that. It will be airing at some point and then available on through the usual channels. So, with that, move to my official voice here now. Sarah Copeland Hanses is Vermont's 39th Secretary of State, elected in November of 2022. She's lived, gone to school, and worked in Vermont since 1971, and her life and career have always centered on service. She's been an educator, a youth coach, a small business owner, and a state legislator. During her 18-year legislative career, she served as majority leader, was co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and was chair of the House Government Operations Committee. Sarah served on the executive committee of the National Conference of State Legislatures. She's passionate about civics and has made civic education and engagement a major priority for her office. She currently serves on the executive board of the National Association of Secretaries of State, and she lives in Bradford with her husband John. They have 3 adult children. And I asked Sarah if it would be all right if I went off script a little bit here with her introduction. I know Sarah through all of these, or many of these capacities, but I also know her as a basketball player. My understanding is that she was a high school basketball star back in the day, and she still sort of runs things Friday mornings at legislative basketball in the auditorium in the old gym in Montpelier. I don't make it as often as she does. I think Sarah's there every week. Running the offense and the pickup game, and I look forward to struggling onto the court at some point. So welcome, Sarah. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And what he left out of that story about not making it to basketball is that usually when I'm driving home from basketball, he's running back to the apartment because he doesn't mind running outside in the cold and the snow and the ice, and I'd rather be in the nice warm gym. So you're still getting your exercise, just without a basketball to chase up and down the court. It is really an honor to be here with you, and I'm so glad that this worked out to be able to come and visit Bennington and talk with you folks tonight. 2025 has been a really interesting year, one that perhaps had a little more focus on elections than we might have thought, given that we don't have any statewide or federal elections this year. But it has been a really intense year, in part because of some of the changes that this federal administration is trying to push out into the states. And I suspect that that's probably going to be the source of a lot of the questions that will come as we're sorting through the index cards. So by all means, if you think of another question, grab another card, flag down Brian, and we'll make sure that we get to as many questions as possible. Senator Plunkett alluded to this, but I think it's really important to point out that elections are a team sport. In order to have well-run, fair, safe, accessible, accurate elections, it really takes a lot of human beings. So in your own community that your town or city clerk is the head election administrator for your community. But they are helped by a board of civil authority, and they are helped by justices of the peace, and they are helped by volunteers who come and help to conduct the elections on election day. This is one of the most important reasons why our elections are safe and secure and well run, because your town and city clerks have it covered, and they are bringing in, the people that they need in order to get all of those pieces done in the run-up to and on election day, and sometimes late into the hour, the late hours, in order to tally those results. So it is increasingly a challenging role to fill in our state, and over the course of recent years. Really since COVID in 2020, we have heard more and more from clerks across the state about how their job has become more difficult. And so I came down early today because I wanted to be able to meet with some of the clerks from this region and ask them how things are going. What can my office do to support? What can my office do to help? And in that way, we're really learning from them what we need to do going forward. We have a really good system of elections because we have 247 duly sworn town and city clerks for a population about the size of the city of Boston. And these are people who literally take an oath of office and conduct their business, whether it be election related or land records related or you name it, many of the other duties that our town and city clerks have, they take that very seriously. And it's really, it's a point of pride that the clerks that I met with today said, we feel so good about the work that your office is doing to support us. And that's music to my ears because they're such important partners and they help us to get this complex job done. So I think what I'm going to do now is suggest that we can jump right into questions because I can tell you more about what the Office of the Secretary of State does, but I think I'll hold on to that until later in case we run through the questions too quickly. But I want to be sure to get through the questions. And Brian, are you gonna?
Representative James is ahead of me.
I'm handing them out.
Oh.
Send them down to the, oh wait, one of mine went away, sorry. I was going to keep the card that had 3 questions on it and just go. Okay, did you guys each get
Yeah, that's
that?
right. Put 3 or 4 questions on a card.
I'm here to help.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
If that's a duplicate or not.
All right, we'll start with, do we know how other states are working to protect their elections?
That's a great question. Can I use that?
Yeah, you bet.
There we go. Then we don't have to.
Yeah, just hang on to that.
Fewer microphone transitions if more of us have a microphone. So yes, there are many different ways that we can look and compare and contrast how states are running their elections. There are a number of different entities out there in the country that actually rate different states' election laws, based on how accessible and fair and secure they are in the way they conduct elections. So MIT has a rating of elections in terms of quality. We have ranked, 2 or 3 or 4 in the nation over the years. And so if you are ever interested in looking at, what does MIT think about elections, that's a great place to look. Another way that I know about what's happening in other states is by being a part of the organization called the National Association of Secretaries of State. We get together twice a year for a conference. We compare best practices, we share ideas, we share we share victories, we share things that are frustrating us, and in that we have an opportunity to really understand the broad differences between the way states conduct elections. And the reason that it's so different across the states is really baked into the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution says that states will determine the time, place, and manner of federal elections, and that only Congress can make laws, putting parameters around how states conduct elections. And there are very few federal statutes that impact how states do elections. And so if you know one state's election methods, and the state next door might look very different. So some states do universal vote by mail for every single election. Other states sort of hit the other end of the spectrum where you have to have basically a signed doctor's note to be able to request an absentee ballot. Otherwise, you're only voting if you show up in person. And so, there's a broad range of ways that states do elections. And some of them are, worth looking at and considering. But I happen to think that if we're ranked, 2 or 3 in the nation, that's pretty good. And I think the one marker that might get us a little higher on that MIT ranking is if we accepted ballots that were postmarked Election Day, as opposed to Vermont law, which is that your clerk has to have your ballot in hand on Election Day, not 3, 4, 5, 10 days later when the Postal Service makes its way through. So I happen to think that Vermonters really like getting their election results in a timely way. I know how many people sit on the Secretary of State's website and push refresh in the evening and watch the election returns come in. And so if we were to switch to being a postmarked state, that would impact that fun that some of us have in watching the returns and seeing as communities vote tallies get entered in.
So yeah, these are great questions. We're going to start with the long one, and I know there are no great questions or bad questions, but the long one starts off with a comment, which is great. So you don't put your names on them, so whoever you are, you know who wrote this. At least from my standpoint. I've always felt totally confident in the election process here in Vermont. Under the Trump administration, however, I am deeply concerned about free and fair elections, including tampering, even in our state. I'm also very concerned about the impact that AI will have on voters. My question, what safeguards are being put in place to protect us? What can we as citizens of Vermont do to ensure that we have free and fair elections going forward?
Oh, big question, and a really good one, a really timely one. There are some really deep and disturbing things that have come out of this federal administration that if fully enacted would actually be a detriment to the security and accuracy of our elections. And it's really concerning because a lot of a lot of the rhetoric that comes from this administration is, like zero tolerance. We have to have, 100% accuracy, security, and all of that. But at the same time, the policies that are being pursued are sort of antithetical to that, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The executive order that came out in March did a number of things, but one of the more disturbing ones that it attempted to do would be to require that every registered voter verify their citizenship with their town or city clerk. And so when that executive order came out, I said, well, I'm just going to do a little exercise here because I'm a curious person. I'm also a pretty savvy person, and I sit at a computer all day. So, I figured, this is going to be no problem. I'm gonna request certified copies of all the documents that I would need if this were to become a reality. So in my case, I changed my name from Copeland to Copeland-Hanses when I got married. So I needed to have a copy of my marriage license, and I needed a copy of my birth certificate because the one that's been pressed in my baby book for 50-something years is no longer has the raised print from the clamp down seal, and so I figured that wouldn't pass muster because it doesn't look, it doesn't look like it's been certified because the seal that was pressed into it a few years ago has gotten pressed down into flat. So, long story short, that whole process took me about 6 weeks to get those documents in hand, and it cost me $30 or $40 in terms of paying for the copying fee. But the other part of that I want people to understand is that, $30 or $50 might not be a barrier to somebody being able to exercise their right to vote. But if you are a cashier, or if you are a farmer, or you are a contractor, and your job is not sitting behind a computer all day, every day, you're going to have a lot more barriers be put between you and your right to vote. So that does not make our elections more secure. The other thing that this administration did that I think is antithetical to safe and secure elections, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration declared elections to be critical infrastructure back when the Russians were trying to attack our elections back 2016, 2018, 2020. Being declared critical infrastructure means that this election sector gets special attention and special focus of the cybersecurity folks in the federal government to help coordinate between the states and between entities. Just in the same way that they do for our power sector, for our hospital sector. I mean, you remember the chaos that we all heard about when UPMC's medical records went down, and the hospital was basically crippled for I don't even know how long. So critical infrastructure is an important designation, and as critical infrastructure, because we're different than the power grid or the hospital systems or airline traffic or whatnot, we needed to have our own team of people helping election administrators in one state understand how to share information with election administrators in another state. And when this administration came in, they fired all of the election security advisors, put them on furlough, and then ultimately let them go. And so we no longer had this team of people who had been election experts, who were trained in cybersecurity so that they could be that channel of communication between the cybersecurity experts and all of us out in the states who are trying to protect our election systems. Doesn't really give you a lot of confidence that we are bringing our A game to elections going forward. They told us at the time that it was simply an opportunity to reevaluate the priorities of the Biden administration to make sure that they were the priorities of this administration. But we still have not seen a resumption in any special focus on election cybersecurity. We know that there are bad actors out there. There are nation-state actors, there are terrorists, there are people who would just like to disrupt America's elections. And we know they're out there trying to do it every single day. And now we don't have a coordinating federal agency that helps us to respond to that and protects us from that. So sad, unfortunate. I think that's enough of the doom and gloom for what for what this administration is doing to protect elections. Was there a second half of that question that I didn't get to, or maybe 2 more thirds that I didn't get to?
The only part that maybe you didn't touch on was I'm very concerned about the impact of AI will have on voters.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes, we are also concerned about AI. In fact, what we think makes the most sense at this moment, since, and we have someone who's got a lot of experience talking about these issues, so maybe I'll ask Kath if she wants to jump in. Representative James has some experience in these conversations, but the real concern is that with just a very short video clip of someone, their face, their likeness, and their voice, you can use AI to make a video clip of someone saying anything. I like to murder puppies or whatever, some horrible something. And that can be used to try to sway voters one way or the other. In fact, there was an AI voice recording that was used right before the New Hampshire presidential primary last year. And it was Joe Biden's voice saying, "Democrats, you don't need to come out to vote on Tuesday. Save your vote. I don't need your vote until November." And it was a very believable sounding Joe Biden's voice saying something that was absolutely false. Of course, everybody should vote in the presidential primary. And so it is very concerning, and we've got a lot of work to do. And do you want to jump in with some thoughts on?
Sure. I only have 2 things to add. So I chair on the House side the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee, and so AI does fall under our purview. And the 2 things that are on my mind right now at the intersection of AI and elections, one is that the House did pass, the Vermont House, did pass at the very end of the last session a bill it was such a baby step thing, but it's important. It would require that any election advertisement, any campaign advertisement that was generated by AI be labeled generated by AI. It was much harder to get that bill out of the House than I had anticipated, and it's now pending in the Senate. And so feel free to reach out to your senators because that's an important bill that I think, like I said, it's a baby step. But if we could just get that done, and all it says, it's not an infringement on free speech in any way. It merely says that if you take a picture of me and put a thought bubble above it that says, "Hey, I'm Kathleen James, and I want to triple your property taxes," that say, this image has been generated by AI, so people know it's not real. The second thing, and this is alarming on a lot of different levels, is that there's a repeated campaign at the federal level to prohibit states from passing legislation related to AI. Period. So there were efforts to get that through the House and the Senate in D.C., and now there's been an executive order, which, like many of these executive orders, is unconstitutional and will be challenged in court. But there's a very concerted effort to not allow any state to pass any state law that regulates AI at all, which is terrifying.
Over to you. On that happy note, yeah.
I think we're on to your question.
Okay, great.
I have a card that has 3 questions, so I'll just do one at a time as we go around, okay? So the first one is to the point. Do all Vermont voters use a paper ballot?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, what is interesting to know is that 49 out of 50 states have a paper ballot that can be traced for all federal elections. Only Louisiana still uses voting machines, and there are some counties in Texas that still use voting machines that do not produce a paper copy, a paper receipt of how the voter voted. But every single voter in Vermont votes on a paper ballot. Those ballots are retained for 22 months after the election, so that if there were a recount request or some other irregularity that required review of that election, we can do that. And then in that way, we can also audit our election results. And so we conduct an audit in December after every general election. We grab, an assortment of towns, larger towns, smaller towns, towns that use tabulators, towns that hand count. We bring all of those ballots together. We use a separate technology to read those ballots than the technology that was used in the tabulator on election night. And, we find remarkable accuracy. The only time there is ever a slight switch of one vote or two votes is usually in the human evaluated part of the ballot, which is if somebody were to write in a candidate. So if someone were to write in a candidate but neglected to fill in that oval where the write-in name goes, that is an instance where that vote might not get counted. If somebody were to write Bob Jones instead of Robert Jones, or Bobby Jones, or BJ Jones, or some other variation on someone's name that one of the poll workers that night didn't understand was the same person, then that is one of the other ways where we see a change. But remarkably, our elections, both hand count towns and tabulator towns, are remarkably accurate. And that's your town clerks and their teams. So.
This is a question about participation, voter participation. How many registered voters do we have versus eligible to vote in the state? I guess participation is a third count, but and I'm wondering, do we know how Vermont compares with other states, those numbers?
Yep. So we have some statistics on that, both on our website and within our Civic Health Index. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, there's lots of resources that you can poke around with. One of them is our Civic Health Index, which has some comparisons between us and other states in terms of voter participation. We have, since enacting universal vote by mail, we have consistently for general elections reached that 70% of registered voters mark, which is really good. We didn't quite reach the high water mark of 2020, back when we were all sitting around with nothing to do except fill out our ballots. So we're hoping that we'll get back up to that high water mark. But 70% is pretty good, but it's not enough, if you ask me. I think we should be looking for 100% participation. If you only have 70% participation and you have an electorate that's pretty evenly split, you still have 30% of your electorate who didn't choose between one of those two people who got maybe 35-36% of the total electorate. So we need to keep working on that, and we will continue to work on that. We have a civics program within the Secretary of State's office. We focus on civic and voter engagement in many different ways. But back to the question about registered voters versus total eligible, we think that we're in the low 90% of eligible people being registered to vote. We think we're closing in there. We're doing much better than we were before we enacted some of the things that make it easier to register to vote, such as automatic voter registration when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Same-day voter registration. Last year we had, in 2024 general election, we had nearly 7,000 Vermonters come out and register to vote on election day. And I think that's fabulous. I mean, that is a tremendous number of people who for whom, the issues and the people on that ballot were really important, but they hadn't yet gotten registered to vote, and they came out and did it on Election Day, which is really fabulous. So good job, Vermonters. So some of those policies that we've enacted over the years to really make sure that there aren't arbitrary barriers between someone and their right to vote, I think are really important, but we still have work to do to get us closer to that 100% mark, which is where I think we should be.
And back to town clerks. So what do Vermont town clerks tell you that they're worried about, and why is their job getting more stressful?
Wow, yeah. One of you must know a clerk really well. So there are a myriad of things that make life difficult for town and city clerks. I think foundationally, one of the things that makes their work difficult is that people hold two notions sort of simultaneously. One is that the clerk is just sitting around not doing anything and doesn't really have a lot to do, and therefore they should be able to instantly do what I want them to do, because they sit around and don't do anything. And then also people tend to think that clerks do everything. And so clerks get calls on the phone all day, every day, about the weirdest questions that you would never expect that a municipal official would be able to answer. One of the ones that I heard earlier today on one of my clerk visits was somebody called to ask if they should have their driveway plowed before they come up for the weekend. Well, I mean, okay, so maybe a driveway camera would be helpful, I don't know. Another one that we hear classically from a lot of different clerks is people will call their office and say, what time is trick-or-treating this year and on which streets? So sort of simultaneously doing everything and doing nothing is always a little bit challenging, I think, but to be more serious, in many smaller towns, the person who is your town clerk is also your town treasurer. So he or she is taking the tax bill and whatever disgruntled feedback someone might want to give when they're paying their property taxes. So that can be challenging. There are technical requirements. There is a tremendous shift in the technology that we use in our municipal government. And, so for a clerk who's, maybe nearing retirement and isn't used to those technologies, that can be really challenging and sometimes intimidating. But I think the other aspect of that makes it hard in some of our communities is sometimes the select boards or the city councils don't recognize the need to invest in technology and in IT support in order to support the clerk being able to get into that land record system or get into the election management system or do the data entry that they need to do with their vital records. And so, there are challenges just in sort of the way the profession is growing and developing that make it hard. Finally, I think, I can't not talk about the sort of the elephant in the room, which is the negativity that comes from, a small part of the population, but it only takes one angry person to ruin your day, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of sort of media silos that people can get into that can leave them very convinced that there is a conspiracy or a cabal of people out there who are trying to, steal elections, maybe. And so that can become the source of some of the real vitriol and negativity that our clerks hear. And what I want to remind people everywhere is that if you are worried about how our elections are run in Vermont, volunteer to help your clerk around election time, and you will see the detailed procedures that they follow. You will see the meticulous way that they follow them. You will see that there are multiple sets of eyes on any ballot, on any issue, on any at any moment. And you will understand how we feel confident that our elections are well run. But there are a lot of people who, hear a story on one of their media sites that they like to watch, and they think that that's happening here. And unfortunately, it can lead to a lot of negativity aimed at our clerks. So next time you see your clerk, tell her thank you.
Or him.
Or him. Sorry.
I don't know for sure, but I
Statistically speaking. But yes, there are male clerks.
All right. So my next two questions on this card are all about ballot counting machines, so I'm going to combine them, okay? Okay, so, but now it's become a multi-part question. So, are the ballot counting machines the same? Are the machines standalone, not Wi-Fi connected and audited, with quotes around it? And then the companies and software. So I'll just...
Since it's multiple part, you're going to have to...
Yeah, I'll just pass that card over to you. Over to you, Sarah.
All right. So yes, in the state of Vermont, we have a contract with a firm out of New Hampshire who helps to do the programming for the optical scan ballot tabulators. These are ballot tabulators that are heavily tested in the manufacturing process, carefully calibrated in the run-up to the election. Again, if you want to know how elections are run, talk to your clerk about what they do to test that tabulator to make sure it's programmed correctly so that an oval filled in for Rob Plunkett goes in the Rob Plunkett tally at the end of the day. They are not connected to the internet in any way whatsoever. Their only brain is in the memory card that is kept under a strict chain of custody in the vault, always kept, secure by your town and city clerk, and returned at the end of the election cycle so that it can be reprogrammed for subsequent elections. There's no plug-in, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no way to change the way that machine reads those ovals after it has been programmed and then by your clerk tested. And so we feel very confident in the security of that system.
Is that standard everywhere or just in Vermont?
I would imagine that is standard everywhere, but there are different systems that different states use that may automatically transmit the results over the internet. I don't know that every state has air-gapped systems that are never connected to the internet. I just don't know that for sure. Again, maybe that MIT election index, you could dig around in there a little bit, or the National Conference of State Legislatures has a lot of information on their website about different states and what kinds of technology they're using. So yes, standalone. And we actually took a trip to the vendor who services our machines this past summer because we wanted to see, what does this look like? This is a vendor out of Salem, New Hampshire, called LHS. They service election tabulators in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, maybe some places in Connecticut and New York as well. When you walk into that building, you surrender your iPhone. You sign in, you surrender any electronic devices that you have on you, and only then can you come in and see the operation and see where they do what they do. They have strict security procedures around around where they're storing all of the storage, all the memory devices that program your ballot tabulators, and they have really strict procedures in terms of how they vet their employees and who gets access to what. I felt really pleased to see the level of security that they use, and it makes me feel very confident in the way our tabulators are serviced. Now, the machines that we use to vote are Dominion manufactured machines. And, you know, there was a whole lawsuit settled about defamation of Dominion as a company because Dominion has been and continues to be, although they've been bought out, so they don't have that Dominion name anymore, but they have been and are top of the line. You know, they are well-tested, secure, accurate vote tabulating machines. And it really only was because of one person's desire to cast doubts about the outcome of an election that probably any of us even know the name of the manufacturer of the tabulators that we use. But I have the utmost confidence that they are machines that do exactly what they are programmed to do. And I feel confident.
All set?
Yeah.
This is a question about the Rockland County election interference case and whether you are familiar with that, know how that's going. And then, do you think that it and a few other similar incidences around the country were practiced for 2026 or 2028?
Rockland County in what state?
New York.
I am not familiar with the details on that one.
Could we ask the questioner to?
I can tell you that in Rockland County, Kamala Harris got 0 votes, which was statistically impossible. So a nonprofit organization who deals with elections got some, voters who swore affidavits that they had voted for her. And it went to court, and the judge let the case go through into discovery. And I don't know where it is at this point. And my understanding is there were a couple of other places in Pennsylvania and one in Colorado where something similar happened. It was quite fascinating when it happened because the news got kind of buried. So of course I read about it in Instagram with some, alternative news organizations. And then I found it in the New York Times and the Washington Post, but I found it like buried in their, political pages. Whereas something like that you would think would make the front page, but it didn't. So, and I'd also like to note that Dominion has been bought, you know that, right? And it's a far right, from what I understand.
So the person who bought Dominion has been in the elections software sphere for a while. So his political leanings have not tainted the product that he has offered through his previous companies, and I don't expect that they will through this corporation. Luckily, these machines are already owned by us in Vermont, and they are maintained by this New Hampshire company who does all of the maintenance on them. So even if we were to have concerns about Liberty Vote, which is what Dominion is now called, going forward, that doesn't impact the machines that we're using right now. So back to the original question, I am not familiar with that election interference case, and I'm now curious, so I'm gonna do some digging on my New York Times app to see what I can find about it. I think that I think that we all have to remain vigilant about how our elections are run in our communities. We have a tremendous luxury in Vermont in that our elections are run at the community level, and that we can go stand face to face with our town clerk and talk about how our election is run. And in that way, we can feel much more confident that something like that could not happen here. But I'm gonna look into that. It's an interesting one and sort of disturbing. To the second half of the question about whether that's practice for 2026 or 2028, I think we have to assume that a lot of the things that we are seeing in the news about what this administration is trying to do to change elections administration are absolutely looking at changing who is able to vote in 2026 and who is able to vote in 2028. It's much harder to change how their vote was tabulated. It's much easier to make it hard for someone who was newly naturalized or someone who is of Hispanic origin to feel comfortable coming out to vote if there's ICE agents pacing back and forth in front of the polling place. Just as a for instance of things that we think might be on the horizon in 2026. It's much harder to change a vote once it's cast, but it's really easy to intimidate people or to put barriers in front of them to make it harder for them to exercise their right to vote.
Good point.
And this question goes along the same theme. So what is the role of a poll watcher / poll observer, and is there a need for them in Vermont?
So every state has some provision for citizens to be able to watch the process. Your town or city clerk will set up space where someone could watch the voting and watch the counting. It is important that that space be set up far enough away from where the person is actually checking in, getting their ballot, voting their ballot, and putting it in the tabulator, that watching doesn't turn into something that is intimidating to the voter. So usually town and city clerks will cordon off an area where people can sit, 10 or 20 feet away from where those activities are happening. This is another potential voter intimidation tactic that is sort of in the back of our minds as secretaries of state. I talk with secretaries from other places, and we're talking about these issues because depending on who you are as a human being, who that person in the poll watcher area is and what they're doing and how they are presenting themselves could have a great impact. And we all want to be really mindful of that. And the purpose of poll watching is just so that an ordinary citizen can observe and see that election procedures are being followed. There are groups out there who are talking about encouraging poll watchers to be more activist in terms of, calling out, I don't think that person's eligible to vote, or I contest that person should be on the voter checklist, and different things like that. In Vermont, there's not a provision for an ordinary citizen to contest your right to vote when you're
Is there any consequence of somebody shouting something like that?
Well, I would hope that the consequence would be that the clerk would invite them to either be quiet or to leave. But the clerk, as the local election official, has the right to ask that person to not interfere with somebody's right to vote.
Are you fresh out?
No, I'm not fresh out. I've got one more.
I'll give this my best shot. Do you ever have that thing happen where you see a word that you've read in print, like maybe dozens of times, but you've never actually heard anyone say it out loud? So congratulations to the person who used a word that I have never heard anyone say out loud. So now I get to try it. Are you sanguine? Okay, everybody knows what I mean. How about sanguine? Sanguine. Are you sanguine?
Sometimes.
About resisting the Trump administration's demands for voter registration data. Data.
Yeah. I don't think sanguine is the word that I would use. I think hellbent would be better. Dead set, very clear. This question, if you're not an election nerd or you haven't been, hanging on every piece of elections news, it really is about the efforts that this administration has been going to in order to obtain full unredacted copies of every state's voter registration lists. Before I zoom into the election specific aspect of that, I just want to step back for a moment and ask you to imagine a world in which you think there should be a federal mega database that has all of your information in one profile, in one entity. Every student loan you took out, every traffic ticket you've gotten, heaven forbid you ever broke a law, every time you voted,
Who you voted for?
well, hopefully they can't find that out. If you were ever eligible for, for food stamps or heating assistance. There is a really interesting and sort of disturbing, deeply disturbing, I shouldn't minimize it, deeply disturbing effort in the part of this administration to gather that kind of information about Americans and to actually use private contractors who are data experts, data mining experts, to consolidate that. Now, we have very strict rules, laws, in our federal codes as well as in most state codes about data sharing. And those laws came about in reaction to the federal government using the power of the federal government back in the Nixon era to target people who were not allies of that administration, right? I can't imagine that happening now. But these laws exist in our federal code that federal agencies, the IRS cannot share data with Social Security Administration, cannot share data with, with food stamps and federal social benefits. These seem to be being violated right now. I mean, I can't say that I can confirm it, but the most disturbing part of it that touches on my work is really this asking for the full unredacted voter registration file. This includes your driver's license number, your full date of birth, your full address, the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, and if you have put your email address and phone number in there, it would include those as well, because they're asking for the whole thing. Luckily for us in Vermont, we have a very specific state statute that says that no person may obtain a copy of the voter registration files, the unredacted voter registration files, if they are a foreign entity, if they are planning to use it for commercial purposes, or if they are an agency of federal government. That's in Vermont law. So to say sanguine, yes. Committed, yes. Hell-bent, right there. That is me. We are following Vermont law. Vermont law was enacted legally and duly, and there is no demonstrated need for the federal government to have the full copy of the voter registration rolls, period, end of story. And we will fight it in court for as long as we need to.
I'm out.
You're out?
Not my turn,
Not your turn, okay.
Okay. This is a question about money questions in elections. So specifically, keeping out-of-state money from influencing Vermont political campaigns. Whether we should or perhaps could, I think maybe there's that part of it too. Could we pass legislation that says something to the effect of every corporation operating under the laws of the state has all corporate powers it has held, except that nothing in the statute grants or recognizes any power to engage in election activity or ballot issue activity?
So this is sort of a two-parter, and I'm guessing that somebody out there in the audience has been getting those glossy postcards that I've been getting at my house from an entity that doesn't look like they're in Vermont, but is attempting to influence Vermont's elections, even though it's not an election year. I mean, they must just have oodles of money to send out those postcards. He does have oodles of money. I think that there are probably some things that we could do to strengthen our campaign finance disclosures so that it is clearer who is funding some of these activities. We've had some conversations about this. My office will always be open to engaging with the legislature, who are the people who need to enact these changes. They tell us what to do, and then we do that. And so we will be happy to engage on how to get more transparency in where money is coming from that is attempting to influence how Vermonters vote. Yeah, there are proposals out there, and I think what's important to understand is that we don't like to change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. We want to wait for a timeout. So 2026 is the next legislative session that these folks will be in session. It is also an election year, so we like not to make changes to election law in the middle of an election, because that feels like cheating, feels like you're changing the rules of the game. So some of these conversations may not play out until 2027. The odd year is usually when we have a major election spill, just to manage expectations there. But this question about corporate contributions really comes back to that Citizens United decision that basically threw the doors wide open for unlimited money coming from corporations. And I think it's pretty fair to say that that has had a tremendous and detrimental impact in our United States Congress since that decision came down. There are a lot of people who are thinking and trying to find new and creative ways to because, barring a constitutional change or changeover in the makeup of the Supreme Court, it's hard to imagine how we ever undo Citizens United. So there is this legal theory that has been battered about in recent months, and that legal theory is that corporations only exist by being given permission from their state, being chartered from their state, and allowed to conduct business. And because corporations are entities that were created by the state, that the state could put limitations on what kinds of things constitute being a corporation. This is untested so far, and we have lots of attorneys who've been chewing on this with us. We're going to watch what happens in other states and see if this, if another state moves in that direction. And then we will consider if that's the right thing to do for Vermont. And we will have to work with these fine folks who will actually have to pass the laws that make the changes in order to do that.
I'll just add that the sender of one of those glossy postcards, they haven't had a lot of presence, I think, in the state. But I just received an invitation to attend a reception in Montpelier as a legislator, hosted by one of those parties. So the activity is picking up.
Wow.
The food be good?
So I want to talk about that just a little bit, and I'm going to try not to be partisan political. This is not a partisan political statement that I'm making, but I think we can all feel that little bit of tingling on the back of our neck at the idea of people coming from outside and trying to sway Vermonters to vote one way or the other, right? It turns out Vermont's a really cheap place to buy an election, right? Because we are a small state. We are a state where your senators and representatives run, basically on shoe leather, and they come and knock on your doors, and they do public gatherings, but they don't tend to spend tons and tons of money, right? So if an outside influence wanted to come in and shift the makeup of your legislature, it would be relatively inexpensive to do that compared to some of the larger states with media markets that are, where representatives and senators are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And so all of this is just a pitch to say, if you like your representatives, if you like your senators, or if you don't like them and you want someone else to be elected, go out and work for them, right? There's nothing more impactful to Vermonters than the word of mouth and somebody vouching for, hey, I like this candidate and I think you should support them and here's why. So let's not let that outside money impact the makeup of our legislature. Let's get out and work for the people that we want to represent us so that we know that they're representing us and not somebody's moneyed interest from somewhere else.
And this next one is a technical question. Do the tabulators use, quote, write once, end quote, memory to prevent tampering once the results are recorded?
Yes, I'm not sure about that term write once, but the way the tabulator works is at the end of the day, once all of the ballots are put through the tabulator, the clerk will push print and one tape will come out with the results, and then no more ballots may be fed into that machine. That machine is done for that election cycle. And that's done in part because we don't want somebody to, for instance, say, well, I'd like to know the difference between those people who mailed their ballot in and all these people who've come on election day, so I'm just going to push the tape now so I can see how they voted and compare it to the people who came to the polls, right? We are all one electorate, so you're going to get one readout at the end of the day, and then there are no more.
That was my question, and when you say tape, do you mean something that is like paper with numbers printed on it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep. Long, and it's a long tape because it's only this wide, so it'll say, Kath James, so many votes, and then run through all of the other representative candidates in that district, and then it'll run through all the Senate candidates in the district. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Paper trail, that gets locked into the ballot bags with the paper ballots, so that if there were, some irregularity that was discovered, or if there was a court order to review the election, or if there's a recount, we'll have the tabulator tape, paper, and all of the ballots, and we can compare them. So when we do our audit in December, we take the tabulator tape out of the ballot bag and we can see, does the tabulator tape match what was sent to us in the official vote record, and does it match what we got when we recounted all of these ballots today? And we find that it generally is spot on, except for those rare write-in circumstances.
Thanks.
Just to add to that, I think this is still true, that tape, when it's run through at the end of the count, it is signed by the clerk and signed by at least one justice of the peace. So even if somehow another tape is manufactured, it wouldn't have those signatures.
Good point.
Good, thank you.
It's a good one. It's two-part. How do you ensure that people with disabilities have equal access and accommodations as needed to exercise their voting rights? And how well does the disability community feel Vermont is doing in this regard?
Such great questions, and it's an opportunity for me to talk about the fact that I didn't know the answer to the second question about how the disability community feels. My perception is that we have a lot of systems in place that aim to make voting as accessible as possible for people with various kinds of disabilities. But my perception is that those tools are not very frequently used by people who should be using them. And I'll give you an example. Every single polling place in Vermont has what's called an accessible voting machine, OmniBallot. machine. And it is intended to be a ballot marking tool that could help someone who is visually impaired, someone who has dexterity or motor control issues, to be able to cast their ballot without the assistance of another human being, because we want people, all people, should be able to cast a private ballot without having to say, hey, can you circle Kath James' name? Oh, I'm voting for you. So we want people to be able to cast their own ballot. But I wasn't sure whether people felt like they could use those machines, because town clerks are telling me that they very rarely see people on election day wanting to use the accessible voting system. So we launched a task force in November of this year that is focused on 4 different communities of Vermonters, 4 different types of Vermonters who we think have particular barriers between them and voting. And the disability community was one of them. We want to make sure that if there are things that we can do to make voting with the accessible voting machine easier, that we are adopting those best practices and sharing them out across the state. But we also want to be open to the idea that maybe there are other things that we could do that would make it easier for people who have different kinds of disabilities to be able to vote. That group is meeting monthly. They will come back with recommendations. If those are procedural recommendations or public outreach and education recommendations, we will be spot on it, and we'll get those done so that throughout 2026 we are implementing things to make it easier for folks with disabilities to vote. If it requires law change, then we will come back in 27 to ask the legislature to make those changes in the law. But we'll do everything that we can to enact as many recommendations as we can for 2026.
While we're talking about disabilities, a lot of people in Vermont are getting older, and they may not have registered last year or the year before. They may have registered decades ago, and so now maybe some of them are beginning to experience dementia or decreased facilities to interpret things the way they really are. What provisions are there, or are there any, why can't those people or someone send in their ballot, a mail-in ballot now, and have them counted, and they may not be valid?
So voting from home is one of the ways that anyone, as they age and maybe have mobility challenges or dexterity challenges, is able to vote. Or people with dementia and mental decline, maybe their strong time is 9 o'clock in the morning, but they wouldn't be able to get to the polls at 9 o'clock in the morning. We don't have a provision, nor would I ever support a provision for removing someone's right to vote. You know, you may lose your driver's license if you are showing decline because you might be a danger to other people. But we don't have a provision to take away someone's ability to vote. In fact, I think we need to work to help make sure that if they wish to vote, that they can.
This starts by saying thank you for coming here. You had spoken a moment ago about the difference between trying to manipulate the results of an election electronically or somehow mechanically versus making attempts to dissuade or discourage people from voting in the first place, and how the latter is far easier and historically what the world knows about. So the question is, what crazy stuff have you considered might happen, and what are the plans if the stuff comes to pass?
I love that question. Who asked that question? Is it the bags under my eyes? Is that how you happen to know that I think about crazy scenarios and what could go I have a ruthless need to make sure that everything is going to be fine. And so I like to think about all of the what if scenarios and what should we do now to plan for that. In fact, that provision of Vermont law that says very explicitly that Vermont will not share its full unredacted voter registration rolls with any foreign entity or with the federal government came about exactly because we like to think about what could possibly go wrong. When that was enacted, it was back in 2017 or 2018, when 3 Vermont communities wanted to be able to welcome all residents to vote on local issues. So your city budget, your city council, your local issues, because they had residents who'd been living in their community sometimes for decades, owned businesses, sent their kids through the school system, but they were not allowed to vote because they were not yet citizens. So those communities petitioned the legislature to allow them to expand the franchise for local elections to all residents. And when the legislature was thinking about the mechanics of that, we really realized, how would a xenophobic foreign entity, commercial entity, or federal entity respond to the Winooski voter rolls if they could get a look at that and see who was on the local Winooski voter rolls? And so then the legislature said, no, we want to make sure that nobody has access to that full unredacted voter roll who might use it for nefarious purposes.
Good for you, thank you.
Yeah. So there's lots of crazy scenarios. I'm concerned about these exercises in deploying National Guard. Voter intimidation looks very different for very different people. If you are walking around in black or brown skin, if you have ever been in trouble with the law, the sight of armed people at your polling place would probably be a deterrent to you exercising your right to vote. I'm concerned about our diminished ability to detect and share information about cybersecurity events, with this federal government having taken away that support. So yeah, there's lots of nightmare scenarios that we're thinking about and preparing for, and we're working with the legislature right now to clarify definitions around voter intimidation and who has the right to bear arms near a polling place, because we've already banned carrying guns into polling places. So we just want to make sure that the worst case scenario of armed militia facing the parking lot at your polling place doesn't come to fruition in Vermont. Anybody got any other nightmare scenarios they want me to? If you have one, grab another card. I'll take it home with me. If I wake up at 4 in the morning and need something to chew on, I'll read your cards then.
So I think you might have touched on much of what this question presents, but perhaps it'll throw some more. So do you feel Vermont law adequately protects our voting rights under the pressure of current federal administration and their followers? For example, banning third-party result challenges or strengthening laws around voter intimidation?
I do believe that Vermont state law coupled with federal law is protective of our right to vote. But because we're living in 2025 and we're increasingly seeing court cases that are undermining the Federal Voting Rights Act, I think that Vermont will move to join other states who are passing a mirror legislation at the state level that really ensures what the United States Voting Rights Act ensured, which is access, free and fair access to elections, and it includes, a lot of the provisions that maybe have already been struck down by the federal courts. And so I'm looking forward to considering that this year because it is, it's not changing the rules of the game, it's just cementing the rules of the game. We think we can move a bill on the Voting Rights Act through the legislature in 2026. It's not changing the rules of how we do elections, so it's not violating anything in that way. And I think it would be helpful for us to get that enacted sooner rather than later.
What about ICE? How can we keep them away from the polling places?
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting conversation that that I believe will originate in the House Judiciary Committee, and then we'll probably end up, hopefully something will end up moving over to the Senate Judiciary Committee. But you know, the question is, why would Immigration and Customs Enforcement need to be in a polling place when people who are not citizens wouldn't be there anyway, so why would they be there? And so, you know, we will have those conversations within the legislature. I think it's safer to keep the definition broad of what sorts of law enforcement activities are allowed to happen
Good point.
near polling places, because, you know, it could be National Guard, it could be, in some states, could be sheriffs. And so, yeah. Do you have a question?
I'm out.
She's out?
I think we're out of questions.
Well, it was really, I think it's already been answered. It was legislation and ICE. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and we've got a few more minutes. Did you have a question, Kat?
I just, before we wrapped, I'm just always so proud of how accessible we have, how far we've come in making voting accessible in Vermont. And just before we go, if you have a minute, if you could just remind people about how things work with, you know, mailed ballots and early voting and requesting absentee ballots, because there's so many different ways that folks can vote. Maybe we could, just when we're done with the more meaty questions, because it's something we should be proud of, I think.
Yes. So thank you so much for that. It's been a labor of love for many years. In my bio, you may recall that I was the chair of the House Government Operations Committee. That's the committee that oversees elections. So for a number of years in the legislature, I was able to help shepherd legislation through, including the universal vote by mail for the general election in 2020 under the COVID emergency. And then because it was popular, people loved it. In fact, 66% of votes cast are cast by those ballots that were mailed to people. And so we came back in 2021 and made it permanent for the general election. There's lots of people who are talking about wanting that to be the norm for other elections. And there are some specific logistical hurdles that would need to be crossed in order to make this happen for all of the elections. And I'm happy to nerd out and talk about all of the elections if you'd like to. But what I want to tell you is that there is an easy way to request a ballot to be mailed to you for those other elections, and that is by going to your Vermont voter portal. So on the Secretary of State's website, you can go to the voter portal. If you have your driver's license number, you can log in with your name and your driver's license number, and it will bring up information about who your town clerk is, what their hours are, where is your polling place, and it will also allow you to, with a click of a button on the website, request your absentee ballots for upcoming elections. And that makes it really easy. You don't have to remember when the election is, and the ballot's going to come to you, and it's just your responsibility to fill it out and get it back to your ballot drop box. If you're going to put it in the mail, please put it in the mail early. We all know that mail delivery has been delayed in recent years. But most town clerks have a drop box or at least a slit in the door where you might drop your tax payment, or your ballot can go in there as well. So Vermont Voter Portal, making it really easy to request your ballot for those other elections. Remember that if you request your ballot for a presidential primary, you have to declare which party you want to vote in. If you request your ballot for the August state primary, you're going to get all 3 ballots, but you can only vote on one of them. And the other 2 have to be returned in the blank ballot envelope, right? So, like I said, we can nerd out about lots of election stuff. Automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, very helpful for people who are moving. And then we have some really great tools in place to make it easier for your clerks to keep track of where people live as well, so that if you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and you renew your driver's license and you've moved either across town or to a different town, that will trigger your town clerk or your old town clerk and potentially your new town clerk if you're in a new town, that you have moved, and they will be able to transfer your voter registration record from one community in Vermont to another. We're also a part of an interstate consortium of states who share information on driver's license applications, so that if your name pops up having just gotten a driver's license in Connecticut, that's going to ping us so that your clerk will get notice, hey, this person may have moved, so your clerk may reach out to you and say, are you still living here? Are you moving to Connecticut? And in that way, we're able to keep our voter registration rolls as accurate as possible. So, yeah.
We have one last question. Whoever is responsible for it was...
Did Ryan ask this question?
It's someone you know, though.
Okay.
That person, whoever it was mind melding with me, actually. So I was going to frame it as whether there was anything else that you wanted to say, and noting that we advertised this as a conversation about election integrity and civic engagement and so forth, but the Secretary of State's office does many other things too.
Yes.
And we don't have time, I'm sure, to go into all of that. But if there's anything else that you would like to say, I think that you're working on that is important to you, that you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah. So the Secretary of State's office has 4 main divisions and 2 special programs, and I'm really proud of all of them. This gives us a lot of touch points with a lot of Vermonters in many different ways. We register every single business and nonprofit in the state. And that's a really important and valuable touch point, not only because we strive to do that quickly and easily so that someone can take their passion and their idea and turn it into a business with as few interruptions or hurdles as possible. But it's also an important touch point when crisis happens, because when the floods hit in July of 2023 and again in 2024, we had a touch point, a way to contact every single business in the state and push out information. If you have supplies or services that you can offer to flood victims, here's where you go to let folks know about that. If your business was impacted and you need help figuring out how to get an SBA loan or how to contact FEMA, this is where you go. We used that to the benefit of Vermonters, and I think that that's such a special and important thing for us to be able to do. Every LLC, every mom and pop store, every major business got that information from us. We also used the database within our Office of Professional Regulation in much the same way. So we license or register over 80,000 professionals in various trades and professions, from architects and veterinarians to nurses to tattooists to cosmetologists. And we were able to push out that information to every professional. So if you were an engineer or a certified wastewater operator, you could you got that information about how you could put your services to work to help Vermonters. Now, the two professions that don't get licensed under the Office of Professional Regulation that were in most high demand are plumbers and electricians. When people's homes were destroyed and their businesses were impacted. And so we reached out to the governor's team and to the Division of Fire Safety, and we said, can you give us all the contact information you have so that we can push this information out to plumbers and electricians? And furthermore, we suggested to the governor, hey, you know, in this emergency, how about an executive order that says if your plumber's license or electrician's license lapsed because you retired within the last X number of years, you tell us what makes sense. Let's give people a reinstatement so that they can go and help their neighbor, right? I know how to wire an electric panel, but I just retired from being an electrician. I really want to help my neighbor, right? So we were able to influence how Vermonters responded to that crisis because we were thinking about how do we leverage the information that we have to get that out to Vermonters. We also run the state archives and records administration, so the entirety of state government, every decision that's been made on your behalf is kept in our archives, and we make it available to people because we really believe in transparency. We've got vital records from the beginning of time. We've got newspapers and other artifacts. I think the most fun would be to get locked in the archives overnight and have nothing to do but wander around and read things and see what we can find in there. So if you ever have an interest in, maybe it's genealogy, maybe it's some other form of history, please visit us at the archives. And of course, the elections division is our fourth main division. We've talked a lot about elections. Two special programs that I want to tell you about. One is our civic and voter engagement program. This was very important to me when I came in as secretary to give some focus to that, because when you live in a democracy, if you don't know where the levers of power are, how are you ever going to be able to make the change that you think needs to happen, right? The more we make government inaccessible by withholding the information about how government works, the harder it is to be an ordinary citizen and feel like your government is representing you. So we're focusing on civics. One of the highlights and joys of my fall has been the Kid Governor program. I hope that you've seen some of the coverage. The videos are on the Kid Governor website. They're adorable, and what is so wonderful to me about the Kid Governor program is that each of these 7 kids who ran for Kid Governor has a platform that I think any one of you might have considered to be your most important issue. They're talking about homelessness, they're talking about access to mental health, they're talking about screen-free days, they're talking about bullying in school, they're talking about healthy school lunches. I mean, it's just an absolute joy. So Rosalyn is our incoming Kid Governor, and we will be inaugurating her in January. So if you want something really fun and wholesome, January 12th, come up to the State House.
So awesome.
It'll be fun. And then Rosalyn and her cabinet, so all of the kids who ran for Kid Governor, if they didn't win, will become part of her cabinet, and they can work on all of their things together with our office, and we will help them and support them. So Rosalyn's focus was on homelessness, and she really wants to make sure that she makes a difference in helping every Vermonter have a home. She said it's just not right. And then the last special program is our Safe at Home program. So Safe at Home is an address confidentiality program that came into the Secretary of State's office 20 years ago or more when Deb Markowitz was secretary. As it was initially designed, it was meant to protect people who are fleeing domestic violence or stalking or human trafficking and need to keep their physical home location private. The legislature expanded the definition of who can enroll in the program to providers and recipients of certain kinds of protected health care. And so we have invested in the program. revamped the portal that we've created a portal, revamped the way we enroll people in the program so that we can get information out to people in real time. They can ask us questions through the portal. We can push information out to them through the portal. We can send educational materials out to them through the portal. And this has really allowed us to not only serve people better, because it used to be, in order to enroll in the program, you had to print the PDF off the website, fill out the PDF, and mail that back into our office. And I don't know about you, but there are probably not a lot of people that I know who are fleeing a domestic violence situation or are being stalked who have access to a printer and can get all of those steps done in a timely way without pulling their hair out. So we made a portal. You can access it with your cell phone. It's simple, it's easy, it's accessible for anyone who needs it. So please tell people who maybe need to keep their home address confidential that this program exists. Because we want to welcome anybody who needs that as part of their safety plan. So that's my 4 main divisions and my 2 special programs.
I know you have a long ride back to Bradford, so we are a little bit over, and I want to thank you for making the trip down today, and thank everyone who came out as well. I think it was a great conversation, and the conversation doesn't have to end here. We're all, the 3 of us are, well, Rob's available to everybody. Bennington 5 or whatever you were, Bennington 4.
4, jeez.
Happy to stay. I don't want to overstay our welcome here, but I will not be rushing out the door. So if anybody wants to chat a little bit, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Yay!